All right, great. We're back. Thanks for joining the show, Richard.
No problem.
You said a couple things in our last episode that made me want to talk to you again about Trump, because I think what I would say is you have a lot of controversial views within the animal rights movement. This is one view that I have that's pretty controversial, which is I actually don't care that much who wins the presidential election. I feel like I'm the only person in
I
the
think you
country.
should.
And let's talk about this. But let me just kind of assert the position I have. I think especially national presidential politics is a lot like professional sports. It is a game. It is a performance. People get very invested. And I'm not saying there aren't real emotional consequences on all sides in the same way that, I'm in San Francisco. So when the Warriors lose, everyone gets really upset. And there is real emotional suffering, but it is mostly a fantasy. And in terms of the impact on our everyday lives, at least with professional sports, we kind of understand it's a fantasy. While most of presidential politics that has virtually no impact on people's lives, people become incredibly invested in a way that I think is actually quite self-destructive and certainly destructive of communities, because one of the implications, if I'm right, about presidential politics is that we should be far more inclusive of people who have very different perspectives on national, especially electoral politics, because the stakes are not nearly as high as we think. And so somebody votes for Trump, somebody votes for Kamala, somebody votes for Jill Stein. It's all kind of the same in a lot of ways. There's a lot to say about why I believe that, but I'll say just very briefly, the primary reason I believe this is if you look over the last 40 years, Democratic and Republican presidential candidates have led to pretty similar, and I'd say negative outcomes for ordinary Americans. And while there is a fight at the top, I think it matters for the ultra elite who wins, because if you are Bill Gates, then it actually matters a lot if Kamala or Donald win, because Bill Gates is a Democrat and he'll get a lot financially, culturally, politically if Kamala Harris wins.
I think he's actually going to lose money financially because of their tax policy.
He might, yeah, because the Trump tax cuts are actually going to benefit Bill Gates in some ways, especially if they're, Kamala's talked about possibly taxing kind of unrealized capital gains. Basically, when your stock appreciates or equity appreciates, you get taxed.
I don't think that's true necessarily.
I think she's mentioned it. I don't think she's necessarily going to do it, but it's at least in the cards. While Trump, it's definitely not in the cards. So there's a lot of things like that.
I think that, that's being misreported, because I know I think they're more talking about rich people using unrealized gains as a means of passing their wealth down. Because if you die and you have unrealized gains, you give it to your kid.
Yeah,
they can cash out tax free. I think that's what she's talking about.
Yeah. It's possible, but I mean, that would benefit Bill Gates' children immensely, obviously, because if he does.
Well, no, it wouldn't, because under her policy, it would be taxed.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that they're trying to increase the taxes just on that that portion of capital gains, not generally.
I think that's what she was referring to, not just outright taxing unrealized gains.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so
because she's spoken to Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban said she's not planning on doing that, just flat out taxing unrealized gains.
Interesting. Well, but let me just say this final point, and then you can explain why you think voting against Trump is so important. I think this is particularly true for those of us who are animal rights activists. And I say this having written and gone on the record as saying Kamala Harris is probably the best candidate for animal rights in presidential history. Her positions are still virtually indistinguishable from Donald Trump's. And the impact on animals is going to be equally non-existent, whether it's a Trump presidency or Kamala Harris presidency. And from a moral perspective, because I believe, and I think you believe, every sentient being should receive equal consideration, or at least some consideration. Even if you give animals some consideration, the impact on animals far outweighs the impact on any humans of any policies either presidential candidate will offer. And therefore, we should be spending a lot more energy trying to figure out how to get the world to go vegan, which is not through Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and a lot less time on who's going to win the presidential race. So anyways, I've gone on for a while. You're the guest. Tell me why you think I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I disagree with your position that voting for either Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really make a massive difference on everybody's lives. I think especially in this race, it absolutely would, for the same reason why in Nazi Germany, voting for the Nazi Party would make a pretty goddamn big impact on people's lives. Donald Trump is clearly a fascist. He is reported to have said some things that are rather flattering about the Nazis. Hitler had some good ideas. I want my military to be as loyal to me as they were to Hitler. He's like talked about horrible fascist dictators like Xi Jinping, Viktor Orban, Kim Jong Un, as like these great, brilliant people. He was thinking of bringing Kim Jong Un into the White House. He was talking about how he loves how Kim Jong Un's people will stand up for him and cheer and clap. This is clearly a guy who's a serious megalomaniac. Oh yeah, and I forgot his relationship with Putin as well. This is a guy who is clearly a megalomaniac, wants that sort of power that these dictators have, and he's clearly thinking of actually obtaining that sort of power. He's talking about replacing most public servants with people who are loyal to him. So replacing like FBI, CIA directors that are just going to be loyal to him. He wants to fire off
I want
military.
to put a pin in that because I think that's very important. But keep going. But I want to put a pin on that. I want to come back to that because I think that there's good reasons that animal rights activists might actually want to support not the specific people he wants to put in, but that basically policy proposal of removing certain civil service protections. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry, I totally interrupted.
Sure. He wants to replace like military generals and people who are going to be just absolutely loyal to him. And he's also talked about giving police officers federal immunity. So if a police officer ever wrongfully arrests you or shoots you for no reason or does any horrible messed up stuff that would get them sued, fired, put in prison, well, now they have federal immunity. You can't sue them. You can't prosecute them. So this all to me shows that, America would be moving towards fascism. Like best case scenario, Trump would just be lazy and maybe he's saying these things, but he's just going to sleep and maybe play a few like golf rounds and then watch Fox News and not do anything. That's the best case scenario. But I mean, if the guy's taking his vitamins and stays kind of cognitively alert and everything, the worst case scenario could be extremely bad.
Yeah.
You're talking about a lot of rights and freedoms getting taken away from a lot of people, especially with Project 2025. Like there's this interest in moving to Christian nationalism, banning, basically outright banning trans people. Making it illegal to transition, gay rights being taken away. So a lot of, and like, of course, religion being part of the school system. So a lot of really bad stuff. And that's not to mention his foreign policy positions where he wants to empower dictators like Putin rather than fighting a fascist dictator like Putin and making sure that no one else gets the idea that they can invade a sovereign country illegally and just take over land, wipe out people, take all their natural resources. He has this stupid idea of appeasement where, I'll just give them what they want and then everything will be fine. And it's just going to empower people like Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong Un to invade other nations because they know people aren't going to step up to oppose them.
Yeah. So I'll say two things about this, and we can go into some of the specifics. The first is, I think a lot of the things you just described are horrible. I'm not convinced the Democratic Party is going to be that different. So,
they're going to be
law
different.
Enforcement accountability is one example of this. If you look historically at Democratic versus Republican counties, most people don't remember, and it's kind of important to remember this, that George Floyd was shot in Minneapolis, not in Nebraska, not in Alabama, but in Minneapolis. And Minneapolis has turned very much against police accountability since 2020. And that's partly because of the excesses of the left. You can blame kind of excessive wokeness, and I think you should blame excessive wokeness for not realizing that you had a very credible complaint about the system of law enforcement in this country. And instead of actually addressing the root cause of the problem, you started attacking people on Twitter for basically saying something that you thought was a little, insensitive or even not even insensitive, just because you decided it was convenient in whatever social dynamic you're in. I mean, you've made this point better than anyone, that people basically use racial justice as a way to secure power in their social dynamics, right? Which is totally messed up. It was harnessing a legitimate social justice movement to secure power in your own social group. But the other reason I think you're overstating your case is that even if there are some policy differences between Democrats and Republicans, the primary impact on most people's lives is not the policy differences as enacted by the president or even by the federal Congress, but by your own local city council, your state legislature, your county's board of supervisors. And I'll give you an example of this: abortion. Most people don't know that abortion actually went up post Dobbs. So we had Roe versus Wade for roughly 50 years from, I forget the exact year Roe versus Wade was decided, but Dobbs was decided, a year and a half ago or so. And abortions actually went up across the country. And very importantly, even before Dobbs overturned the right to an abortion, there were many states in this country where abortion was effectively illegal because local counties, boards of supervisors, city council, state legislatures put so many regulations and restrictions. It made it so difficult to get an abortion that effectively you didn't have a right to an abortion, even if supposedly the Supreme Court had given every woman that right. And the reality is, in most people's day-to-day lives, the thing that's going to impact them most, what's happening on the streets, whether they are able to get a job, whether they're able to get a home, most of the decisions that really impact those day-to-day activities that you engage in are going to be made at the local level. So to the extent you care about politics, you think there's a big policy difference between Democrats and Republicans, get out to your city council meeting, get out to the board of supervisors meeting, maybe the state legislature. But in California, honestly, even the state legislature doesn't matter because it's too big and it's super majority Democrat. So it's just, there's no difference between any decisions you make. Well, what the president does is almost irrelevant. So let me give you an example of that. So I made basically 2 points. One is, I don't think the differences are nearly as big as you might think between Democrats and Republicans. And the second is, even if you think there are some differences between Democrats and Republicans, you really should be agitating locally rather than nationally. On this first point, I think this idea that Donald Trump is uniquely fascist, which I think is the primary reason people say it's a big deal, right? When you hear people, and when I've heard you speak about this, this is the primary reason you think it's a big deal. 1 year ago, from today, literally, November 2nd, I was put in a jail cell by a Democratic judge appointed by a Democratic governor and prosecuted by a Democratic prosecutor, all Democrats, in a county that voted 75% for Democrats. They put me in prison after denying me my right to present evidence that the company had been lying under oath. The company owner said repeatedly, no battery cages in 2015, no battery cages in 2016, no battery cages in 2017. There were battery cages in 2016, 2017, 2018 because I saw them. We were not allowed to present them in court. I was told that I could not bring defenses that, by all accounts, were constitutionally legitimate defenses, that we had law professors across the country saying these are totally appropriate defenses. And I don't even mean like animal personhood. Like, there's some boundary pushing arguments that we didn't necessarily expect to be able to bring, but even basic arguments, like, for example, in California, to convict someone of conspiracy, which I was convicted of, you have to prove they had the intent to engage in an unlawful agreement. And we were not allowed to present evidence that I'd consulted with lawyers who said, what you're doing here, you are legally entitled to do, because when there are animals dying, just like a dog in a hot car, you're entitled to break a window. And even if you disagree with my opinion, I should have been able to present that evidence. I was not able to present that evidence. And the number one reason for that is because the Democratic Party didn't like what I had to say, because they are in bed with the Farm Bureau and the farming industry in Sonoma County. And that is fascism. That is fascism. And to me, the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party in a lot of counties across this country, and certainly at the national level, is not in their willingness to go after dissenters. It's just what positions you take that lead them to go after you, right? And unfortunately, we're both in a position where veganism is a marginal viewpoint in both the Democratic and Republican parties. So both Democrats and Republicans go after us. But if you're fundamentally concerned about the integrity of the democratic process and whether dissent is punished, whether power is controlled by a small number of people against a larger number of people, then I think the Democrats and Republicans are equally bad in a lot of ways. And the Sonoma County case is an example of that. And we've been in Republican counties where I have been given the right to speak freely in court and say, what I think we are entitled to say in court to defend ourselves. So, and I just think most Americans don't realize this, that Democrats actually go after people who are dissenters as well.
Right. But the issue is we're talking about like what Trump specifically is going to do if he's in power. Mm-hmm. And if police get federal immunity, like that could be a huge, huge problem for a lot of people. I've been through the court system myself, and I know just how corrupt and shady
And fair it is.
almost every single police officer is. I don't think people realize the extent to which they're corrupt, and there's a very, very, very big gray zone where, they're not necessarily going to fabricate evidence against you, but they're going to do things to slant things in a direction in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
So like when I got arrested, they arrested me on a Friday night, so I wouldn't be able to see a judge until Monday morning.
Yeah.
They charged me with some like BS charge so that I wouldn't be able to see my wife and I'd have to get other living accommodations.
Wow.
And when I was in front of the judge, she said, "Why was this order given? It makes absolutely no sense." So like they won't go necessarily to the extent of completely and utterly fabricating evidence, like planting drugs in your back pocket or something.
Mm-hmm.
But they have this mentality that you're an asshole, we're trying to get you, or they're trying to justify what they're doing. They think you're a bad guy, so they'll put a bunch of obstacles in your way to screw with you. And in almost every single case, they won't be fair.
Yeah.
So like if police officers are granted federal immunity under Trump, and I don't know how serious he is about doing this, but he has stated it, that could be a huge goddamn issue with the amount of corruption that's already in the police force. It's already hard enough to prove that a police officer lied on a report or faked evidence or is hiding evidence against you in favor of your case, which again happens all the time. Imagine if they have federal immunity. Like, you're absolutely completely screwed. So like on something like that specifically, I think clearly the better candidate would certainly be Kamala, and especially if you're an animal activist doing fairly radical activism.
Yeah.
I think that would be particularly concerning for you.
Yeah, I think this point is an important one, and this probably explains part of our disagreement too, because I think police officers effectively already have immunity. And I know,
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm sure you're familiar with the doctrine of qualified immunity. It
Yep.
prevents a 1983 action if there's even the most minimal procedural mechanisms that have been met. So for example, if a police officer goes out there and gets a search warrant or gets an arrest warrant, then they effectively cannot be sued, no matter how nonsense and how preposterous. Short of just proving they outright lied in the affidavit, they have to provide an affidavit when they go to a magistrate judge and ask for a search warrant. But short of just proving that there was like an intentional false statement made, it's very, very hard to sue a police officer in the execution of a search warrant or a raid. And the more important point is, even to the extent there has been some accountability for police misconduct, it's mostly been at the ranks of like low-level officers, right? It's not supervisors, it's not chiefs of police, certainly not prosecutors. And the biggest thing for me is judges. There has to be accountability for judges, because the number of judges who have made absolutely disgusting decisions, and this might be a little controversial, I actually think SBF's judge is one of them. Louis Kaplan has made some of the worst decisions of any judge in the federal court system that I've ever seen. He's the one who put Stephen Donziger in jail because Stephen Donziger refused to turn on his own clients. And he put SBF in jail after denying him the right to present evidence that he had actually talked to lawyers about the various setups he had put together at FTX. But the only accountability that exists even today is it's very, very limited, and it applies only to lower level officers, and the key decision makers are not affected. And importantly, Kamala Harris is one of them. One of the weird things about the last 4 years is like the left went from basically condemning Kamala, like back in 2019, 2020, the meme was going viral. Kamala's a cop, right? And today she brags about how she's putting people in jail. She talks about how she's got a Glock and she'll shoot him when it comes to her home. And the left, that used to be super pro gun control and super pro police accountability, suddenly ignored the fact that she's put innocent people in prison. And she's done that for virtually her entire career and is bragging about it today, right? So I can see your point. I completely agree. And I'd love to hear more about your experience if you're willing to share it with the criminal justice system, because that might, one, I'm just kind of interested. It might help illustrate the problem for a lot of people listening to this who do have a misguided view about how much faith we should put in law enforcement. But when the choice is between Trump, who's saying a lot of dumb stuff, and I think Trump definitely says a lot of incredibly ridiculous, stupid, offensive things constantly. I mean, he's also just an idiot. Like he goes on and about like sharks, how he's going to choose
or
between a
Hannibal
battery.
Lecter.
Yeah, whether I'm
Yeah.
going to get electrocuted or, he talks about whether we should use Clorox to cure COVID. I mean, he just says the wildest things constantly.
Electric boats wouldn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. So Trump says just the wildest things, but in terms of their actual policies, I mean, Kamala was defending the infrastructure of mass incarceration for virtually her entire career. And she even brought down a prosecutor, Terrence Hallinan, in San Francisco. This is the city I'm living in today, who's actually trying to make reforms. He was legitimately trying to correct some of these injustices in the police misconduct. And she took him down by appealing to the elites, by appealing to the wealthy, by appealing to folks who didn't give a shit whether some poor, disabled person in San Francisco was falsely accused of a crime and thrown in prison, and it happens all the time. It's like people don't realize, I mean, you're 100% right that every step of the way, when you're going up against the US government, you're already at a massive disadvantage. And if you are not an extremely privileged person, and I'm an extremely privileged person, like I had plenty of resources financially, legally. I'm an attorney myself. I'm a former law professor. I had law professors writing amicus briefs for me, like trying to get me out of jail. And still, I got completely railroaded. You can imagine how the average person is affected by the criminal justice system. And Kamala Harris was the head of that system in California for about 8 years, and in San Francisco for like 10 years before that. Maybe it wasn't 10 years. Maybe it was more like 4 or 5. I forget exactly how long. So I'm just not convinced it's going to make a big difference for people on the street, because whether they have qualified immunity or complete immunity, the reality is the system of criminal injustice in this country already has immunity.
Well, why would you want to make it worse? Right?
Yeah, I don't want to make it worse. What I don't want is, I don't want people to believe that by voting for Trump, you're going to make it, or voting for Kamala, or Jill Stein for that matter, you're going to make it much better. Because I think, like I said, I think all this is just a performance. At the end of the day, it's a way. I'm not saying it's an intentional deception, but effectively, all of the attention around national politics distracts people from the things that actually create change. That's my view.
Well, I see society gradually getting better. When I was growing up, there wasn't really any talk of police accountability. And this is also before like cell phone footage and everything.
Yeah.
So, again, under an administration where Trump has said he wants to use the death penalty on drug dealers, which essentially means I don't think he could ever do that. Yeah, but with that sort of mentality, where he's talking about essentially just targeting black people, because this has been done before in the 90s with the crime bill. I don't think there are any federal charges brought against any white people for crack cocaine possession or dealing. It was all black people. The police only targeted black people. So, when you're talking about an administration,
but Biden and Harris were a big part of that.
Well, I know everyone was. Everyone was.
So this goes to my point. What's the difference, right? I mean, if you're concerned about
there's
that,
a difference.
Harris,
there's a difference here because at least the Democrats, they have they have morals. At least they might not be the most caring type of people where they're considering the bail system is kind of messed up, and all these court costs are kind of messed up. The way we prosecute people is kind of stupid. But at least they have morals. They're not talking about executing people, for committing victimless crimes, basically, right? So when you have, the head of an administration that has that sort of mentality, that wants to execute drug dealers, that wants to mass deport people for really no reason other than, well, they're brown skinned, so let's just get rid of all the darkies. I don't see that being a good course towards, prison reform or criminal justice reform. Whereas I can see a Kamala Harris presidency being a course towards something like that.
Yeah, I mean, So on this deportation issue, and I want to talk about animals at some point too, because that to me is the primary reason I don't actually care that much about presidential politics. But on this deportation issue, I'm pretty sure, and I'm Googling this right now to confirm it, I'm pretty sure Obama actually deported more people than Trump did. Do you know
He
if that's
did.
true? Yeah. So
Yeah,
this is
so
again
he
an
did.
example of how
There
a
were
lot of this is
differences
performance.
though in their administration.
Yeah, there were.
A lot of what Trump did was illegal. So
Mhm.
these were people that were seeking asylum, which is legal status.
Yeah.
And what Trump did was he kept them imprisoned, and he often separated families as well, which was a huge controversy. So that was highly abnormal, and it probably violates your constitutional rights because if you're seeking asylum, you haven't committed a crime, but you're being locked up for no reason.
Yeah. I think there were differences, and I'm not saying there aren't differences. And obviously, if you're one of those kids or one of those families that was separated
And
because of
by the way, what's
policy,
important is who they're planning to deport. Like Trump is planning to deport people who've been living here for 20 years, but have like some strange status where like their
Yeah.
family was from another country and they didn't
Mhm.
technically get some like paperwork right, and they're on some sort of like weird visa or something. Like he's going to deport people like that who literally only speak English and then send them back to Mexico.
Yeah. I think there are differences, and I think there are values that Trump holds that are pretty abhorrent that at least publicly the Democrats do not hold. But I think a lot of the difference just comes down to Trump saying the quiet part out loud. That I think Democrats and Republicans alike have done a lot of damage to various marginalized communities over the last 40 years. I mean, I actually think if you go back before the 1980s, there actually probably was a difference between the Democratic and Republican parties. But starting with Reagan and then certainly with Clinton, there's been this consensus, and it's largely oriented around concentrations of power. I think most Americans just don't realize how dramatically the last 40 years have changed concentrations of economic and political power. This country just used to be.
It's going to be worse under Trump. He's going to lower taxes for the richest
Maybe,
people.
maybe not. But if you look at the last 40 years, whether you're talking about Obama and Clinton or Bush and Reagan, it has been on one trajectory, which is increasing inequality, more and more power in the hands of a small number of people. And it was Bill Clinton, not Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, who said the era of big government is over, who basically decided that neoliberalism and this idea that we should deregulate everything was the dominant paradigm in American politics. And obviously, like the most powerless beings in this country and all over the world are animals. And so to the extent political parties are just bending to power, and I think, to be honest, I think that American politics has always been about power, and maybe human politics has just always been about power. I do think there have been genuine movements that have built power around compassion. I think the civil rights movement was an example of this. I think the anti-slavery movement 100% was an example of this. When you go and read about those activists, I mean, these are not people motivated by power. Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, these are true believers. They're willing to die for their cause, right? But politics, as usual, at least, has always been dictated by power, but there's been accountability to that power. And prior to the 1980s, frankly, it was the Cold War. You know, a big part of the reason America and American politicians had to behave somewhat ethically was because they knew the Soviet Union was watching them. And at any point when they enacted some injustice against Black people, for example, it actually had geopolitical implications. You know, there could be communist revolutions around the world. They could literally lose a war in Vietnam because, you know, their allies or their adversaries become either less or more motivated to fight because they look at America and say, this is a country of hypocrites. They claim they're fighting imperialism and, you know, Soviet encroachment and fighting for democracy around the world when you say they don't even give people the right to vote in their own country, right? And there just has been no check on American power over the last 40 to 50 years, and that's been incredibly destructive to domestic politics. And ever since that check has disappeared, as far as I can tell, the Democratic Republican parties have been the same. And you know, you talk
there's
about
only one party that tried to commit an insurrection.
January 6th, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that was
like
the party,
again,
or do you think
at
that
the
was,
very least, the Democrats have like some amount of respect for the Constitution, whereas Donald Trump literally shits all over it.
but how much of that is just the Democrats pretending to have respect for the Constitution, but when it comes to someone like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange or frankly, an animal rights activist?
Edward Snowden was a scumbag, total scumbag. He was working for the Chinese. He was getting paid by the Chinese to spy. And then he took a bunch of data, gave it to the Chinese. He ended up leaking it on the internet, and then China didn't want him anymore, so he fled to Russia.
But do you think he exposed legitimate unlawful activity by the U.S. government with the NSA's wiretapping American telephones?
Maybe you could argue.
I think the overwhelming
some of
consensus is that he did. I think even Obama has admitted that it was illegal.
Well, sure, you could argue for that, but Snowden is fundamentally just a jackass. like he is. Do you want do you want people within the intelligence agencies to work for foreign governments and then leak classified intelligence?
Yeah,
like fundamentally, the guy's a dickhead. What he did was not out of altruism. I
agree more with the latter claim than the forward claim. I'm thinking
well,
he's a dickhead,
what he did was not an
he
act
actually
of
worked
altruism.
For the Chinese government. What?
No, he did. He had Chinese handlers. He fled to China. I think they got upset that he leaked this publicly, and then they didn't want him anymore, and then they like shipped him off to Russia.
I think isn't that more like an internet rumor that's unsubstantiated?
No,
there's a lot of discussions about this. I don't think there's a lot of concrete evidence of that.
No, he was working for foreign agents. He didn't do this out of altruism where he discovered this and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. The public has to know. He was working for Chinese agents. And then, they didn't want anything to do with him anymore. And then he went to Russia.
Okay. Well, what about Julian Assange? Do you agree? Do you think Julian Assange is a scumbag too, who deserves to go to prison because he leaked secrets about the American government?
He did some stupid things. If he had not given away some of the names of people and just redacted some information, he probably wouldn't have had any issues. He did some really stupid things. He leaked intelligence that actually put American lives at risk. That's why the government went after him, because the intelligence he leaked, it basically ensured that like thousands and thousands of people could end up getting killed. So that's the problem with Julian Assange. He did something super stupid, and he should have been prosecuted.
Yeah, I'm not as convinced he did anything different from what any journalist would do, and it was primarily
a journalist would have redacted some of the information for national security reasons.
Yeah, my understanding is that journalists who've done a deeper dive into this, and I'm not an expert in Assange, so I may be speaking incorrectly. You may have better and more accurate information than I do. Is that there's no proof that anyone was harmed by any of his disclosures, other than the reputation of the U.S. government.
They could have. Yeah. The issue is that they could have. Like if the U.S. was like in some,
it could have. Okay, but would you agree at least
if the U.S. was at war with another country that had like missile systems or something, like that could have compromised.
Okay, but would you agree at least that there's this famous video, and then we should really talk about animals because that's like again the primary reason I have this position. But do you remember this? There's this video that Assange linked with Chelsea Manning's help of American military helicopter shooting up a van that's full of kids, and they actually also shot a journalist in that same shot.
Yeah,
and, like laughing about it, and they covered it up entirely, and they claimed it was just business as usual, or and that was that was probably a war crime, and this is something the U.S. government absolutely covered up, and we know the U.S. government continues to do this because it happened in Afghanistan too. Like even during the withdrawal, the U.S. government shot a missile at someone they claimed was a terrorist. Turns out it was like an aid worker and his kids, and the U.S. government even doubled down on it after the guy's family said, wait, we were working for like a Western NGO. We're on your side. You bombed our father and our brothers and sisters and killed them all. And now you're claiming we're terrorists. And like, we have no power to do anything about this. People like Assange and Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden willing to come out and speak the truth, whatever you think about their motivations and their integrity as individuals, like we don't have a real functioning democracy because that means the powerful people can get away with doing whatever they want. And that's exactly what happened with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. They had very concrete evidence of very serious.
So I agree. Chelsea Manning is Chelsea Manning is a bit of a messed up case. Julian Assange, he deserved what he got because he was being just remarkably stupid, and Edward Snowden
Being
is just
stupid doesn't mean
complete
you go to
scumbag.
jail. If that means you go to jail, then we're all going to jail, Richard.
Well, just because you're stupid and don't know any better, it doesn't mean you shouldn't face the consequences of what you're doing.
And you're not just saying he was stupid. You're saying he was stupid in a way that potentially endangered people. Obviously, it's because all of us are stupid in some ways.
Like he put thousands of lives at risk.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just has to do with just how much you think transparency matters and whether the government has legitimate.
He could have been transparent. Like if he had just redacted some information, I don't think the government would have gone after him. Like they might have been mad. He might have been banned from entering the U.S. or something. But
yeah, I don't know about that. If you look at like the Reality Winner case, there's so many other cases where the government's going after people for kind of completely insignificant leaks. And Chelsea Manning's another case where like they went after Chelsea Manning. What did she do? She basically exposed the U.S. government was murdering civilians and trying to cover it up.
There's like a couple problems here where I can be a little sympathetic towards some of these government agencies because you don't want to promote leaking of classified information. There's a chain of command. If there's an issue, you bring it to your superior. They can look at it and then bring it up to their other superior and then like see if there's, they should prosecute. Yeah. Chelsea Manning didn't go through the proper chain of command. I haven't looked up on the story for a while, but I think she went straight to like the New York Times or something. I don't think she actually went to any of her superiors and tried to go through the proper chain of command so these people could be prosecuted. So you can't have people just like, just send it to the New York Times. Just send it to the New York Times. Leak it online. Edward Snowden, you were working for the Chinese, but what you did overall was good. So like, whatever, I guess we can like, if you allow that, then there's going to be so much that's leaked. So they have to kind of try to keep a tight ship and make sure that people are disincentivized from doing some of this stuff. So it's not a simple matter of, well, they're doing this for altruistic reasons, and ultimately this was good, so I guess we'll allow it. Like, again, if you allow that, you're going to have to, like, how much are you opening up, right? For people to just go to the New York Times or post stupid shit that could put people's lives at risk.
I think your critique would be totally fair if the chain of command actually worked. But do you actually have faith the chain of command works when it comes to whistleblower complaints in the U.S. government?
Well,
having had a lot of experience with the U.S. government, I can tell you the number of times we try to do the quote unquote right thing by reporting to the appropriate parties and had them come after us instead or come after whistleblowers. So an example of this would be, this is getting into animals now. So Iowa Select Farms, we worked with this whistleblower who's exposing ventilation shutdown, all these other abuses during COVID-19, all the slaughterhouse shutdown. So these factory farmers are like, okay, we got these pigs. We can't slaughter them. They're getting too big. They're literally getting too big to fit in the pens. And also we don't want to feed them because it costs money to feed them. And they're too big to slaughter because once a pig, most people don't know this, but pigs are killed when they're babies. They're 250 pounds. When an adult pig is 600 pounds, they literally just cannot slaughter them. The machinery cannot handle a 400-pound pig, much less a 600-pound pig. And these pigs are getting big. So they decide to just close all the vents, pump in hot steam, and roast all the animals alive. And the government was paying for all this, right? And so there's an employee at Iowa Select Farms who, even before this, thought there were violations of law. And he was right. There are certain kind of basically space requirements during transport that his company were violating. He would basically go, he was a trucker. So he'd go and see that there was like some space requirement that he was required. Like his truck was supposed to have 500 pigs and they just say, just stuff 700 in. And he was like, wait, this is a truck for 500 pigs. They're telling me to stuff 700 in. That seems wrong. I mean, am I going to get in trouble? So he's already seeing this, and he reaches out to us first because he sees an investigation we do and says like, hey, I saw you guys did this thing in Utah. Just want to let you know there's something weird happening in Iowa. And then later he finds out that ventilation shutdown is happening, and he reaches out to us again. And this is after. He only reaches out to us as a last resort. He goes to the Department of Natural Resources, which regulates animal welfare stuff and kind of this sort of thing in Iowa. No response. He goes to his company. He asks them if they're going to do anything about it, and he just asks the supervisor, hey, I just want to let you know, they're kind of forcing me to break the law here. They don't do anything about it. And so he comes to us because there's nothing else to do. And he didn't even do anything illegal. He didn't have an NDA. There was nothing illegal about what he did.
Guess how
the government responds.
Yeah, sure.
The FBI shows it up at his doorstep and threatens to put him and his wife in prison. The FBI. All because there wasn't even an allegation he did anything illegal. All he did was share with us information. He didn't plant any cameras himself. He didn't do any investigation himself. He just tipped us off to the fact that his company was breaking the law. This is what happens when people follow the chain of command. And this is why people like Chelsea Manning get fed up and say, like, you know what, F this. I got to go to the New York Times because the chain of command isn't working.
So 2 things, though. The example you gave, that's a private industry. The U.S. military isn't a private industry. They use private contractors, but
it's
well,
worse.
in some ways, in a lot of ways, it would be better because they're not financially incentivized to let a lot of this stuff slide.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, like, the U.S. military isn't like systematically trying to slaughter, mass amounts of people. So you could expect a guy who's like, big cheese at a slaughterhouse, if they hear about, they're like abusing animals here. It's like, well, yeah, that's kind of our job.
Sure.
So I mean, people working within the U.S. military, they do get investigated and prosecuted. It's not like that never happens. People are charged with, war crimes and all kinds of stuff within the U.S. military. It's not a perfect system, obviously. Yeah. And right now, they're dealing with a lot of sexual abuse on military bases. But there is some level of accountability. The chain of command does seem to work fairly well. People do get prosecuted. And again, as far as I understand, Chelsea didn't actually go through the proper chain of command to show what was going on. There could be some reasons for that. Maybe she got the sense that nobody would care or something like that. But as far as I can recall, I haven't looked at the case in a while, she never actually tried to go through the proper chain of command to show any of this. So that was the big issue with her case, as far as I'm aware. It's not like she tried to go through the proper chain of command, that didn't work, and then went to the New York Times, right?
But does that justify putting her in prison for, what was it, 5 years? I think it was actually a longer sentence than that. I think Obama just commuted it, right?
Yeah, it was, I think initially it was a very surprisingly long sentence. Yeah. But I didn't expect her to stay in jail for very long.
35 years. Holy crap.
Yeah, it was surprisingly long. I remember hearing that, but I kind of knew she wouldn't.
Do you really think the reason she got 35 years is just because she didn't follow the chain of command, or do you think it's because the government was trying to cover up what she exposed?
No, I think it's because she didn't follow the chain of command. I think if she had followed the chain of command, it fell through, and then she went and leaked it, probably would have still gotten charged, but you probably would have seen a much... Yeah. You wouldn't have seen a 35-year sentence.
I will say, I thought it was pretty brave that Obama commuted the sentence. Granted, Obama did a lot of horrible things, but I think there's, I'm sure, a huge amount of pressure within the military-industrial complex to not do that, because Chelsea Manning was hated, and Julian Assange was hated and is still hated by the military-industrial complex because Chelsea Manning did a lot of damage.
Well, he was stupid. Like he just did remarkably stupid shit that put a lot of lives at risk.
I mean, he is stupid. I mean, okay, so he's brilliant, but he's stupid. He's reckless. That's the way I'd characterize Julian Assange. And I think
I would just say stupid.
Yeah.
Like again, looking at those documents, I don't know what he was thinking. Like, you have to be a moron, and none of that information had to be there.
Yeah.
He could have just redacted that. The same information that he wanted to get leaked would get leaked, and he wouldn't have put anybody's lives at risk. So I think he might have done that maliciously.
And you think he wouldn't have been even prosecuted if he just redacted those names? Because I've heard this argument too, that
there's no way to know. Like, we don't have a Futurama what if machine, but I think he probably either would have gotten a slap on the wrist or just would have been banned from like the United States or something, like just put a ban on his visa or something.
Yeah. I want to ask you about animals, but before I get to that, I feel like I'd be bereft as a host to not ask you if you're willing to share kind of what was your own experience with the criminal justice system?
Oh boy. So I can't even remember what year this was, but there were 2 court cases that I was involved in. The first case was there was a suspicion that I was mentally ill and dangerous to myself or others. So that was due to the video content I was making. And I remember the exact video in question. Basically, I just said, look, if you abuse animals like this, like you pay for animals to be murdered on a mass scale, you deserve what you put out into the world. If you pay for animals to be murdered, you deserve to get killed too. But because I'm a more ethical person, I'm not going to contribute to that sort of violence. I literally even said it in the video that I wouldn't do something like that because I don't want to contribute to that kind of violence. Police show up at my door, arrest me. They send me to a mental hospital to get evaluated.
Wow.
They evaluated me at the clinic and they said, I'm perfectly sane, not a danger to myself or others. They sent me home. A week later,
super messed up.
Yeah, a week later, and by the way, I had friendly conversations with all the officers there too. Like we were talking about vasectomies and stuff, and whether or not people should have kids, like just some antinatalist stuff, and I got along with them. So it's not like I was like, fuck you, eat shit, like spitting in their face. And that was kind of, no, got along with everyone, got a clean bill of health, and they sent me back home. I think like a week later, I would go out really early in the morning a lot of the time, just to go downtown Toronto, do some like filming just for fun, not for my YouTube channel. I was just doing photography. And my parents said there was like some van that looked like it was an undercover police van that was right in front of our house. And they were there at like 7 or 8 in the morning when I was already gone. And they were there for hours and hours and hours. And I think they were waiting for me to leave the house to arrest me.
Wow.
Well, it turns out by late afternoon, they come out and they show like there's a warrant. They searched the entire house, tore apart my room, and they didn't find anything. I don't know what they were looking for, but I think they thought I had like guns or something because there were like BB guns and stuff in my videos. And they didn't find anything, didn't take anything. And they end up not criminally charging me with anything, but they were going to take away my right to own any weapons for, I think, 5 years. So I had to fight that in court. And what ended up happening, which was kind of fortunate for me, was they changed prosecutors. And the new prosecutor actually looked at my videos and thought I was really smart and liked me. So he said, let's get rid of this like whole stupid court case. Like I got a lawyer and everything. And he said, look, if you just go get a mental health evaluation and they tell you have a clean bill of health, we'll just end it. Which I already did like the first day they were there, but I had to go to a private clinic and I think it was like $1,200 or something. Wow. And I got a clean bill of health and then the case was over. That was super stupid. The second time was really stupid. So I accidentally bought a pair of leather gloves and then I just made a video about it, how like sometimes, the stupid stuff happens and like just return it. And if you can't return it, throw it out and then, just move on with your life. Everybody makes mistakes. And I had a skit in that video where I grabbed a BB gun, pointed at my head, shot, and then acted as if I was going to kill myself over this. And it was just like a comedy sketch. Based on that, they said that I was in possession of illegal firearms, even though it was a BB gun. And they also said I'm a danger to myself or others because I was talking about committing suicide. So they arrest me, they take my BB guns and everything, they search the whole house. They also arrested Jasmine for some reason, probably, and yeah. And we go to the police station and the cop admits the only reason he did this is because he doesn't like me. He doesn't like how I make these vegan activism videos online. Apparently the whole department was watching my videos and this is how they found out about it. So all these cops are watching my fitness videos And the department head, like the chief or whatever, sees me because everybody else is watching the videos when they're not doing anything. And he just doesn't like me. So he just decided, oh, well, there we go. There's a BB gun on screen. We got him. So I had to go through court, and the only thing they could charge me with was possession of a prohibited weapon. And guess what it was? It was a folding knife.
Wow.
So they claimed that one of the knives I had could be opened with centrifugal force. The most bullshit, petty thing you could possibly imagine.
Wait, what does that even mean?
Wasn't even
with centrifugal force.
So it means you can just flick it open just by like moving your wrist rather than having to like use your thumb or another hand to open it. It's one of those bullshit laws that they put on the books for like, I don't know, just so they could get street gang people
like a
for
switchblade
nothing.
sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a stupid law that literally does absolutely nothing, and it's just there to fuck with people that they don't like. So if they arrest some like gang member or something because they don't like him, oh well, you got this kind of knife, I guess we can add that to your charge, that sort of thing.
Wow.
So it wasn't even the weapon they were looking for that they charged me with, and they also lied. It can't be opened with centrifugal force. Yeah. So I talked to my lawyer about this. He said basically they're the only ones who can do the test on the weapon to see if it can be opened, so they can easily lie about it. Even if we try to contest it in court, they can just easily lie about it. So what ended up happening was I could either fight it in court, which not great chances that I'd win, he said, because they could literally just lie about the evidence against me. Or I could take a plea deal where I would just have to be on probation for a year, which isn't long, and I'd have my criminal record expunged. So I took the plea deal because it would be more expensive, and there's not a guarantee I'd win. And at the end of it anyway, I wouldn't have a criminal record. So I took that, and now at least I don't have a criminal record. But yeah, like I literally had a cop tell me to my face the only reason he's doing this is just because he doesn't like me, wanted to fuck with me. And again, he arrested me on a Friday night, so I wouldn't be able to see a judge until Monday morning. And it was this whole annoying process.
Yeah. That's super messed up. And that happens to so many people. I mean, not to diminish kind of your experience, but like every individual experience is awful.
I am convinced. I wouldn't be surprised if half the people who plead guilty in court aren't actually guilty and they just take the plea deal because
it's easier.
At the end of the day, okay, the charges aren't very serious and the prospect of winning either isn't 100%, like it's not great, like there's a small chance, and if you lose, you're really screwed because you spent all this money and you're going to get a prison sentence and everything, versus taking the plea deal where okay, you had probation for a month and then like you can go on with your life. So I'm convinced like there's probably a huge likelihood that a lot of people who end up pleading guilty aren't actually guilty.
Yeah, and the vast majority of people in the United States, and I imagine this is true of Canada as well, do take pleas because the process itself is a punishment. I mean, for one, a lot of people don't have money for bail, so they're just stuck in jail. So it's actually quicker to get out of jail to plead guilty because otherwise you're going to be stuck waiting for a trial and nervous and anxious the entire time period rather than just knowing, okay, it's going to be 6 months or a year or even just probation, I'm out. But also just the amount of resources being provided. You know, I imagine in Canada you have this right too, but in the United States you have a right to counsel in a criminal case. In theory, every defendant. That does not actually live out in the real world at all because you have defenders.
Public defenders are morons.
Well, no, they're not all morons. A lot of them are good, but
some are really good.
Some are amazing. I mean, so my co-counsel in Merced, Chris Carraway, he now works at the University of Denver. He was a public defender before he joined the animal rights movement full time. But he told me that his typical caseload was between 150 to 250 cases.
The
150 to 250 cases.
The caseload destroys their ability to provide an adequate defense.
A lot of times, and we had this experience because we've used public defenders in a couple of cases, and we never relied on them for this reason. But a lot of times, the public defenders are walking to court, on the day of trial,
Dead tired
hearing,
on
and
the
they
day
don't
of
know anything
trial.
about
They
the
don't
case.
know anything about the case, and on the
They're
cab
literally
ride over,
defending
they read
exactly.
about it. Yeah,
Because you know how much time consuming it is to deal with one case, right? And that's just one case. Imagine
yeah,
someone trying to represent
250.
150 people. Like, okay, I'll tell you, when I was a corporate litigator and we did some white collar crime cases, guess what my maximum caseload was ever at its peak?
Like 5.
Yeah, it was like six.
Yeah,
6 cases. And these are, and this is like, and there's 6 cases where I'm one of usually like 8 or 9 attorneys. So it's not just me.
yeah.
So it's like, I'm
Oh,
not responsible for all of them. I just like, I have one role and it's, but
my
it
uncle
is
is an
wild.
attorney. My uncle's an attorney, and he specializes in insurance cases. And I went to his office once, and just for the one case, I could not imagine. Like, it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
He had like stacks of paper on his desks and like 5 big thick law books, and he said, yeah, I've got to read like 2,000 pages of
Mhm.
all of this and go through some of these like books on the case law by the weekend. And that's just for one case.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Because every case is different. The facts are different. The laws are so complicated, and just to figure out how to fit the facts into the legal defense you're going to provide in a particular case, it just takes an enormous amount of time. I mean,
Yeah.
you know this because you've dug into the facts. I mean, you're not a lawyer, but you've dug into the facts and various allegations against activists. It actually takes a lot of time to do that.
Yeah.
You have to do a huge amount of reading, and you're not even dealing with the law. You're not dealing with criminal procedure and criminal law and the specific statutes. You're just trying to get the facts, and even that takes forever. And to
Yeah.
do that for 250 cases, 150 cases, frankly, even
It's
doing
like
it for
impossible.
15 is impossible. See, we have so many people who are going to prison. So I told you last time we talked, my first cellmate when I was in Sonoma County Jail was just innocent. I mean, he didn't commit the crime. He was just guilty of being a poor Vietnamese person who couldn't speak English and was like a drug addict. So no one cared about him. Just whatever. They just wanted to get someone in jail for the crime. And he was guilty of looking a little bit like the guy who actually committed the crime, but honestly, not even looking that similar. That was it. I mean, I shouldn't even laugh. It's horrible. I don't think I told you my other cellmate. My other cellmate was in a situation where I think he did legitimately, quote unquote, commit the crime. So he was charged with grand theft auto, but he was just like almost everybody in jail, was a meth addict at the time, and honestly doesn't even recall exactly what happened. And usually the use of drugs is not a defense. You can't claim an insanity defense because you use drugs, because kind of when you use drugs, you're sort of responsible for all the consequences of your conduct. But what it can do is, while it's not a defense, it can eliminate your criminal intent. So for example, if you're on drugs and you think the car is yours because you're so delusional, then you haven't stolen a car. You just literally were so delusional. You thought, and it's not saying insanity, therefore I'm excused. It's saying like literally you just don't meet the elements of the crime. In the same way that if I get into a Honda Civic, I have a Honda Civic that's a piece of shit. But if I see another piece of shit Honda Civic and I get into the car and I drive off of it, and obviously it's a little weird because how did I drive off of it without the keys? But if I imagine somehow the keys were already in the car and I drove off of it, even though I took someone's car, I didn't have the intent to take someone's car.
I actually had a friend who had a funny story. He's a bit of an older guy. He drove a Plymouth, and there was another guy with the exact same color Plymouth parked near him. And somehow the key worked in both cars. So he accidentally took the wrong car, and the cops thought he stole it. And he showed them that his key worked.
Key actually worked in it. Wow.
And then they just left, and
exactly, because he didn't commit the crime. And so similarly, So anyways, my cellmate, and so he's got a legitimate defense because he honestly just doesn't even remember what the hell happened. Like he was on, and this is what happens when people on meth. They really do. Like, I don't know if you've ever been around someone who's like seriously addicted to drugs, but I've got a family member, not a super close family member, but I actually won't even say who it was because I don't want to out them necessarily. It's their story. But I have a family member who was addicted to drugs, and like this person would just steal things from everybody without even realizing it, because they're just, all they're thinking about is how do I get drugs, and they have no concept of ownership. They're just like, I need these drugs, and so there's money here. This money will get me drugs. They're not thinking about, I wonder who has property ownership of that money. They're just thinking, there's money. I need to get the money to the person who's going to give me drugs, because they're like zombies. They're so addicted to drugs. And so my cellmate's got legitimate defenses, but I kid you not, he goes into court. The prosecutor and his defense attorney, who's an appointed counsel, he doesn't have the money to pay for a defense attorney, are both basically trying to convince him to take a plea, and are telling him, oh, you're not going to get too hard. Don't worry about it. Things are going to be fine. It's easy if you take a plea. You did take the car. Everyone knows you took the car. So I know you have this defense. But he says on the record, I'm not ready to take a plea. I'll think about it, but I'm not ready to take a plea. And so he goes back to jail and he thinks, okay, I'm going to have some time to think about this because I talked to my attorney. He comes into court the next time and the judge says, okay, we're on for sentencing. You've taken a plea. And he's like, wait a minute, I didn't take a plea. And he fires his attorney on the spot because he realizes, wait a minute. And I've seen the transcript. So this literally happened. But so he fires his attorney at that point because he's like, this is ridiculous. Like my attorney, I told my attorney I'm not taking a plea and they're putting me on for sentencing now. And the judge gets mad at him because he's like being difficult in court. And he says like, this is bullshit. And so she sentences him to this very severe sentence. He goes pro se at that point because he doesn't trust anyone. He's just like, all right, I don't trust any of these guys. These guys are all screwing me. And the defense attorneys and the prosecutors are all working together. They're all buddy-buddy because they're all trying to save time. They don't want to deal with someone who's not making them any money. This is like some poor, in this case, Cambodian guy who has no money. He's not paying his lawyer anything. And these lawyers are getting paid like, poverty wages to represent these clients. They don't have time to work on them anyways. So he goes pro se, and because he's pro se, he doesn't hit the deadline he has to hit to appeal and say like, hey, I didn't actually take a plea. And so now no one will take his appeal, even though like I've seen the transcript. The transcript literally shows the judge saying, we're not going to accept your plea because it seems like you're not ready to plea, because they have this argument with he's basically having a disagreement with his attorney. They come in the next hearing and the judge forgets that he didn't take the plea and just sentences him to it anyways. And the guy's still sitting in the jail cell right now. So there's so many cases like this. And here, my message to you and to everyone listening to this podcast is these are not isolated cases.
No.
And these are cases that Kamala Harris supervised, and she supported the incarceration of people in these cases. And I agree that if you look at the rhetoric, Kamala is better than Trump. She doesn't say the absolutely outrageous, wild stuff, but I don't think Kamala Harris is a bad person. I think she's probably a good person. I think Trump probably is kind of just a mean, selfish person. I don't think Kamala
is a horrible person.
What Kamala is, and what I think the Democratic Party is a product of a machine. They do not care intrinsically about ethics in any way. And one test of that is, how do they care? What do they say about animals? Because the true test of whether you have real ethical fiber, whether at your heart you're actually concerned about vulnerable beings, is whether you're an animal rights activist. And I know that's a hard test and a lot of people fail it, but I really do believe that. I think if someone is genuinely trying to be an ethical person, at a minimum, and I know you're not the biggest fan of Alex O'Connor, at a minimum, they should be where Alex O'Connor is, right? That's the minimum requirement for me. To be a serious and ethical person. And I don't think there's anyone in the Democratic Party, at least at the leadership level, who's a serious ethical person.
Well, I don't think they've really been considering much about animal rights specifically. And I think that's most people. It's just the product of the society we live in.
Yeah.
But I mean, when we're talking about human rights specifically,
Well,
I think it's clear.
You're giving these people a fair pass, but how do you?
Well,
how do you
it's not that I'm giving them a fair
I'm not even
pass.
Saying,
it's not that I'm giving them a fair pass. It's just like, there's not a big animal rights kind of message in any of these political parties. So it's kind of strange that you'd expect that of the Democrats, but not Republicans, or any particular party. But
I expect that of both of them. But if they do not even consider the position, again, the Alex O'Connor.
Well, look, it's like when you're talking about a guy who's saying, let's murder anybody who's a drug dealer. Like, this is a guy who doesn't care about human rights. Like, I don't know how you would argue for animal rights with a person who does not care about human rights. And I mean, and especially on Donald Trump's level, like this guy fetishizes dictators. Like, he full stop does not care about human rights. He just wants ultimate power and control. And he basically wants everyone to worship him like Kim Jong-un is worshipped in his country. So I don't know how you'd argue animal rights with somebody like Donald Trump. I could see an avenue of arguing for animal rights with somebody like Kamala Harris.
Yeah. She did go to a vegan taco shop. Did you see that video?
Yeah.
It's great.
Think Trump
I love it
too, didn't he?
What's that?
He went. I think he might
He
have
said he was
actually
talking about
visited.
it, but he couldn't even pronounce the
Yeah,
word vegan. He kept saying
yeah,
vegan.
vegan.
He said,
Yeah,
I don't know about this vegan food.
it's. I've seen a lot of boomers, like older guys, pronounce it vegan.
Yeah, they do say vegan all the time. No, I think Kamala, on an individual level, is honestly probably more open to it. She didn't just go to a vegan taco shop. I actually went to that taco shop, and I got to say,
Like, by the way, like across the whole Republican Party, I've seen a lot of them be opposed to lab-grown meat. Like
yeah,
they've already tried to ban
well,
it in Florida. Ron
they banned it in
DeSantis.
Florida. They did outright ban it
Yeah,
in Florida.
I don't
Yeah.
even know how they could do that. But
Oh, it's
like
totally
again,
unconstitutional.
yeah.
It's totally
I,
unconstitutional.
I I don't see Democrats doing that. So again, if we're
But
going to tie this into
Amy
vegan
Baldwin and
future,
Elizabeth Warren were the ones who sponsored the Dairy Pride Act.
yeah,
Tammy Baldwin is a Democratic senator in the state of Wisconsin, and she was fighting for the Dairy Pride Act. And this is a law that just outright violated the First Amendment blatantly by saying you cannot call soy milk milk. It was like,
yeah, that was.
are you kidding me?
I guess
in
coconut milk
Chinese,
needs a new name, right?
but I mean, first of all, that's just a violation of the First Amendment. But second, this is your priority. This is your priority as a state
Yeah, I know.
senator when we have 100,000 people dying of overdose deaths. We have wars and erupting around the world that could annihilate human civilization and the entire species. And your priority as a senator in the state of Wisconsin, a swing state that is hotly contested right now, is to ensure that soy milk companies cannot use the word milk. That was one of our priorities. And that is a Democratic senator, not a Republican.
Yeah.
So I think on an individual level, you're right.
Again,
I think the problem is people confuse the individual propensities of the leaders with the structure of the party as a whole. And the structure of the party as a whole is that if
the
you are the sort
bureaucratic
of
bloat does make it harder to make like large sweeping changes. But
not even large sweeping changes, even small changes. I think that you look at
I mean, look but like to that on that topic, look at what the Republican Party has done. Like they've shut down the government multiple times. They've blocked like the border bill that actually most Republicans were going to vote on in favor of, and they just blocked it because Trump didn't want it. Yeah. Like they've been blocking these bipartisan bills and shutting down the government like crazy. Like at least Democrats, they let the process work. And I mean, look at the amount of bipartisan legislation that Biden's been able to pass, even when they actually don't have as many seats, in the Senate or the House. So Democrats are better at making reformation. And I mean, again, they generally support policies that are more in alignment with our political beliefs than Republicans who are basically just a party of big business.
Yeah, that I think that Democrats in general have had slightly better policies for animals. Probably at least, certainly in my adult life and probably my entire life, even going back to the 80s. But I think the reality is that their competence administering the machine in some ways blocks us from actually realizing the machine is broken, right? So I'll give you just one concrete example. So there's this law in the books in the United States called the Animal Welfare Act, right? Which it has various provisions that protect animals in labs specifically, not animals in farms, because there are specific exclusions written into the law that prevent any farm animals from getting any protection in the Animal Welfare Act. But there are provisions that require humane treatment of animals in labs and breeding facilities, zoos, and so on. And there's even specific provision in this law that requires dogs receive exercise, right? In labs and in all breeding facilities. Since the Animal Welfare Act went into effect in, I think, the 1970s, I think it was when it was passed, there have been hundreds of thousands of dogs crammed in cages that bureaucrats at the USDA indicate are considered, one, humane housing under the statute, that stuffing a dog into a cage that's twice the length of their own body for her entire life, so 7 years, to the point they've grown psychotic and are spinning for hours on end every single day, like emotional torture, psychological torture, to the point all these dogs become just, they're not even they're not even fully cognitively functional living beings anymore. They're broken. And I deal with one of them who's only in her cage for a year. Like, this is a beagle we rescued from a cage. Her name is Julie. She still spins. You know, we rescued her in 2017. It's now 7 years later. She's still, every time she's nervous, she starts spinning. It's crazy. It's unbelievable how much psychological damage they do her. And this is because the USDA interpreted humane housing as including a cage that is twice the length of the body of a dog plus 6 inches. They interpreted a statute that specifically says dogs have to receive daily exercise because Americans love dogs. Daily exercise, okay? So over the last 50 years, I mean, this is preposterous, right? This is complete preposterous because no one would consider this humane housing. No one would consider like being able to walk across a cage floor that's twice the length of your own body, daily exercise. But that's what the USDA said. They said, okay, if you make the cage twice the length of the dog's body, that is enough space for them to get daily exercise. Then you don't have to give them any exercise beyond just having a sufficiently large cage that they can walk twice the length of their own body, right? Under both Democratic and Republican administrations alike, animal rights activists have been fighting since the Animal Welfare Act went into effect to say, this is BS. This is complete preposterous nonsense. Like, no one can look at this cage. And frankly, I guarantee you 95, maybe 99% of Americans, if they saw the cage Julie was raised in and they saw the statute and said the animals are required to have humane housing and they're required to get daily exercise, they'd say like, nah, this is wild. You can't stuff a dog in a cage like this and say this counts. And we've been trying to get Democrats for the last 50 years to even just acknowledge the issue. And they have not budged because the biomedical industry, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't care. And because the reality is, if they actually gave the dogs daily exercises, their cost would increase. You know, right now, a dog from Ridgeland Farms cost about $600. If they actually had to give them daily exercise, that cost goes up to like $2,000, right? Because you got to have a lot more workers if you're taking every one of those dogs out of a cage. It's at least, it might even be 10x. It might not be $2,000. It might be $6,000 per dog. Because you got to raise that dog for like 3 years, give them daily exercise, and then ship off to somebody.
And these are dogs used for research?
Yeah. And so,
well, by the way,
I'm not
Democratic administration, they've gotten rid of the requirement for animal testing for medical research. So again,
this is the Democrat. This is the Republican administration under the EPA, right? Trump did this. Oh no!
Trump?
The Modernization Act. So yeah, Trump got out of the requirement for the EPA, which regulates certain chemicals. There's independent regulation by the EPA and the FDA, and the EPA got rid of an animal testing requirements under the EPA. But yeah, there was a recent law passed with Democratic support called the FDA Modernization Act that did remove some animal testing requirements for FDA approval of drugs and other chemicals that are required for approval by the FDA. So that's one example of like Democrats are better, but if they're not even better enough that we can protect dogs, like and not even protect dogs in some dramatic way, but just get the goddamn laws enforced. We cannot get Democrats to enforce the law. Then is this really a meaningful difference? Let me give you one other example though before we go, because people love talking about Prop 2 and 12. And I supported Prop 2 and 12. These are these big ballot initiatives in California that took animals out of cages. And everyone says, oh, rah, 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 Democrats did this. And actually, you know, I will give Kamala credit. She'd actually defend Prop 2 and 12 when it was faced litigation. Biden did not, for the record. Biden totally caved and went along with the pork industry to try and take down this law. That was basically a law that would prevent mother pigs and egg-laying hens from being confined in cages so small they could not stand up or turn around their entire lives. Like 6 years, 7 years, give this animal a chance to turn around once is not too much to ask for a living being to be able to turn around and see behind them once. And Biden went against this, but Kamala did support this. And so, and the truth is, you know, Democrats have been better on this issue. And there's a reason California passed this, and in a state like Iowa or North Carolina, they can't pass this. So you might say, okay, doesn't this mean Democrats are better for the animals? Yes, but, and here's the big but. Do you know how much space Prop 12 actually gives mother pigs?
Yeah, it's like barely anything, right?
Yeah. 24 square feet. Do you know how much space Prop 12 gives egg-laying hens? 144 square inches. So it went from 116 to 144 square inches. And I guess that's an improvement, but you're talking about a 3-pound animal. So like imagine a small dog living on 1 square foot of space her entire life. Like we have to be asking for more from both of these parties. So I just think it's nonsense to say, from my perspective, the Democrats are better for animals. This is like the poverty of low expectations. This is like saying, you know, oh, we have one kid who's a serial killer and the other kid is a serial killer, but at least doesn't burn people alive, just drops them in acid. So let's choose the serial killer. Let's ask for more. Let's say to both of these parties, you need to give us more before we're going to say you are better for the animals.
Well, right, but I don't want this to disincentivize people from voting because although the gains might be marginal, that's just the reality of a democratic system, unfortunately. There's just like a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of like consideration for big industry, and you're not usually going to see these kind of large sweeping changes all at once.
Yeah.
So it's not that your vote doesn't matter and you're not making a difference and you shouldn't bother because like neither party is particularly good or ideal. Yeah, in a lot of cases you are voting for the lesser of two evils, but the lesser of two evils is always better than the bigger evil. And things improve gradually over time, right? Like, it's not like things aren't moving forward in a direction that we want to see. So don't let that disincentivize you from actually voting.
This is the most optimistic that I've ever seen you, Richard. In every video and conversation I had with you, you are now the bastion of progress for human civilization and society in this conversation. Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think things are improving, but I think that part of the way they improve is a recognition of how broken the current system is. And like, to me, the idea, oh, it's a democracy, so we have to work within the confines of democracy, that is a complete cop-out because our leaders are going out of their way to block actual progress. And this is in the Democratic and Republican parties alike. Like, it is Democratic attorney generals, governors, and prosecutors across the state of California that refuse to enforce Prop 2. One thing I didn't say about Prop 2 and 12 is, do you know how many successful enforcement actions there have been since Prop 2 went into effect in January 2015?
How many?
Zero. Tens and tens of millions of animals who've gone through the abuse of a factory farm, including large numbers of them who are literally 100% demonstrated to have been in battery cages. Gestation crates, that actually has been phased out, mostly because even before Prop 2 went into effect, they're already moving pig farming out of California. So there really were no pigs in gestation crates in the first place. The only big facility that had gestation crates in California, even in the mid 2000s, was a Smithfield facility in Central California called Cork Pork that was already shutting down anyway. So like, it's really, Prop 2 and 12 are really just about egg-laying hens. And, you know, not only did we report that the Prop 2 was being violated, not only did state inspectors acknowledge Prop 2 was being violated, but when we showed them, you know, in court that Prop 2 was being violated, the court denied us the ability to present the evidence and put us in prison for pointing this out. And this big owner, Mike Weber, who just donated another 6 figures to the No on Jay campaign in Sonoma County. He's like a super rich, influential guy. The Democratic Party just cased him and says, this is what we want. And the Democratic Party in that same fight, you know, when partly as a result of all this tumult in Sonoma County around egg farming, a bunch of activists, including good friends of mine, are trying to ban factory farms in Sonoma County right now. And the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, the Democratic Party acted unconstitutionally, illegally to remove from the ballot initiative the purpose of the ballot initiative, which it is completely contrary to California law. Every other ballot initiative, the ballot initiative starts with for the purpose of X. It's legally required that this purpose be indicated. And for the ballot initiative on factory farming, and only the ballot initiative on factory farming, they removed the language, which wasn't even language activists drafted. It was language that the county council drafted, the county's own attorneys, when the ballot initiative got proposed. It used to say, for the purpose of animal welfare and improving water quality. And now it's just removed. No one knows. All they see is just like jargon about concentrated animal feeding operations. And again, this is the Democratic Party voting universally. And it's because of money and influence and the concentration of power we've seen. Because you now have like a couple of extremely powerful companies. Like there used to be, I think, 2,000 egg farms in Sonoma County a generation ago. Now there are 3. And they're all owned by these extraordinarily wealthy, influential people who control everything. You know, and the Democratic Party is doing it just as much as Republicans. And I think people need to know this, because even if you vote for the Democrats, understanding, and I'm not saying don't vote. I for the record, I voted for Kamala. But you've got to understand how limited that is going to be when you have a two-party system that has eventually become the uniparty when it comes to corporate control of the political system. Anyways, I'll get off my rant.
I think if you're going to vote in the interest of animal welfare, so like Kamala or Trump, one important thing to consider is geopolitics. So if we have a Trump presidency and he's just going to appease all of these dictators like Xi Jinping and Putin, again, this is going to set a precedent where you may see more large-scale conflicts across the globe because these dictators are going to see, okay, well, this strategy works. We go to war, then, if it's not going so great for us, we can still claim the territory we gained, wait a few decades to build up our military and everything, do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So that definitely impacts the lives of not only people, but also animals. Russians flooded or broke a dam that caused mass flooding in Ukraine, and that killed a ton of animals, including some at animal sanctuaries. And that's also, not to mention, animals get hit by missiles and artillery shells as well. Just the loud explosions and everything. That actually makes like birds and crap get hearing damage so that they can't like hear certain calls. A lot of animals end up abandoning their young because of those like loud noises. And with domestic animals as well, obviously with supply chain disruptions, that can make it hard for them to get feed and stuff. So
Some of the stories from Ukraine about dogs and cats and other animals abandoned while they're starving out, they're awful. You're right.
I think a party like the Democratic Party, they've clearly taken a hard stance against fascist dictators. They're willing to go to war with China if they invade Taiwan. They're doing everything they can to support Ukraine, make sure they get a victory. And I think over the long term, with that sort of leadership, you're going to see far fewer of these types of conflicts.
Isn't it concerning to you that Dick Cheney is supporting Kamala Harris?
No.
Really?
I could see why Dick Cheney wouldn't like Trump.
Less safe place?
What do you mean?
You don't think Dick Cheney contributed to making the world a more dangerous place in terms of war? I mean, he started war that destabilized the entire world and created ISIS.
The issue with the Iraq War was basically Dick Cheney and Bush created this like bullshit commission that fabricated evidence basically, and that was like the reason for the invasion. I'm not necessarily against the invasion itself. It's the reason for the invasion and the way America handled Iraq after they defeated the Iraqi military. They completely and utterly fucked that up.
Yeah.
They tried to do better in Afghanistan, but Trump largely fucked that up too. He basically gave all the power to the Taliban, legitimized them as as a group. He already initiated the pullout process in the most retarded way imaginable, bypassing the Afghan government. And the issue with the pullout of Afghanistan can largely be blamed with Trump.
Yeah.
But the United States, I think, clearly is handling foreign policy better when it comes to invading foreign countries and then dealing with some of the like stabilizing issues afterwards. I think they did learn a lot from Iraq, except Trump, of course, because he has no fucking clue what he's doing. But no, Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, I don't see that as a red flag. Like the KKK endorsed Trump. Like I'd say that's a much bigger red flag. and not to mention the neo-Nazis. A lot of them are pro-Trumpers too.
Yeah, I mean the Proud Boys, that sort of thing. I don't know. Why do you think that the Iraq War could have been justified? I mean,
Saddam Hussein was a crazy, wacko, jackass dictator, and he was causing trouble in the region for a long time.
I mean, so is Putin. Should we invade Russia too? So is Kim Jong-un. Should we invade North Korea?
Well, yeah. If China wasn't an issue with North Korea, the United States should absolutely invade North Korea, but China would probably start a war over that.
War III, and then we're all dead. What? Okay.
No.
Here's the question I asked.
China doesn't have enough nukes to really be a legitimate threat to U.S. security. But It's just that a large scale war on with China, just if you could avoid it. But I think NATO should absolutely intervene in the Russia-Ukraine war. I think they're just being cowards.
What war that the U.S. is involved in over the last 50 years has worked out well?
I don't know if I
Genuinely.
could say worked out well, but was justified. The invasion of Afghanistan, I'd say, was absolutely justified.
But it didn't work out
I
well.
think
You agree with that?
it didn't work out well, but again, that is in large part due to Trump. In large part, he wasn't the. There was a lot of problems going on. They like, especially at the beginning of the war, they did a lot of stupid shit. The Taliban just had more money. A lot of that was from drug trafficking, and rather than just trying to create better business opportunities for a lot of Afghans, they just tried to destroy these poppy fields and crap because they thought it would get rid of the Taliban's financial resources. What that really ended up doing was pissing off a lot of fucking farmers and crap and a lot of local communities. And then they ended up becoming sympathetic to the Taliban because they would give them money. There was a lot of stupid things made, especially at the beginning of the war. The U.S. kind of quickly realized, okay, that's a dumb idea. So then they started supporting infrastructure and trying to create, like, allowing people to grow poppies and stuff. But yeah, Trump absolutely nuked any possibility of a good future for Afghanistan. I think the invasion of Iraq could have actually been a good thing if the U.S. didn't completely and utterly shit the bed when it came to maintaining stability in that region. They did a lot of crap that pissed off the Iraqi people. I think I can't remember who it was, but they put a guy who is in charge of some government position there, who was like torturing people, who wasn't really well liked, and they put him in the some leadership role, and that pissed off a lot of Iraqis. They did a lot of stupid crap. Yeah. Vietnam was completely and utterly unjustified, and even the knowledge they had at the time, that was just stupid from day one. But
Yugoslavia was a disaster in the 1990s as well. The main result of that was just bombing the Chicago. I mean, we didn't actually invade Yugoslavia, but you were very young. I mean, when were you born? You were probably born
91.
90? Okay. I mean, you were like 2.
Yugoslavia was
a complete disaster.
Stupid.
I think people made the same arguments they make today about Ukraine, about Israel and Hamas.
Well, by the way,
always making the same arguments for war. Just they always say, "Oh, we have to deter terrorism. We have to stop genocidal tyrants." And like, you can probably see the point I'm getting to.
Well,
Yugoslavia in the last 70 years
really
of American history,
case.
There's not been a single war that even remotely neutral historians or political scientists would conclude was a good war. Every single one of them has been bad. And my question for anyone who supports anything other than a non-intervention policy is, why do you think this one's going to be different?
Look, you have to intervene.
The example people always give is World War II. And so we have one war.
You're telling me after 9/11, the U.S. shouldn't have invaded Afghanistan and went after Osama bin Laden? I think that's what India did after a terrorist attack in Mumbai. Do you remember? So this, actually, I don't know how long ago this, I think it was in the 2000s. When was the terrorist attack in Mumbai? Do you know what I'm talking about? There's like, there's a lot of Muslim there have been a lot of terrorist attacks.
So in 2008, there was and granted, okay, I'll grant that this isn't as big as 9/11, but there was a large number of terrorists from this group from Pakistan that had connections to the Pakistani government, actually. So, I mean, in many ways worse than Al-Qaeda, because Al-Qaeda was just a legitimately non-governmental terrorist organization. I mean, granted, it got some support from various governments, but Lashkar-e-Taiba, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but they just outright pulled out machine guns and bombs and just started blowing away everybody in Mumbai, right? Because they're upset about, I think, among other things, Kashmir and just like Indian encroachment on, I could be getting this wrong, on Pakistani territory. You know how the Indian government responded?
How?
Nothing. They did nothing. And what happened after that? Because of that, India's government was able to maintain the moral high ground. I shouldn't say nothing. They did secure borders. They did some things to basically protect the people, and they tried to investigate. And I think they did do some like targeted assassination style things, which I think.
Yeah, so they didn't do nothing.
Okay, they did something, but they didn't. What
How
they
many
didn't
people
do is they
died?
didn't bomb. What's that?
Well, how many people died?
175. So it's an order of magnitude less than 9/11, right? And
Yeah,
what happened
well,
on October 5th.
3,000 compared to 100 or so.
Or 1,200 on October 6th, for Israel. But still,
So-
the point is, I guarantee you that if the U.S. government had 175 of our citizens murdered by a terrorist, we would go after that country because that's just our political culture. And in India, I think it was Congress at the time. I forget. It might have been the BJP.
Well, India doesn't have the sort of resources that the U.S. has, and Pakistan is a nuclear power, isn't it?
Yeah, but Pakistan is a nuclear power, but they could have done things like just even invade sort of the border territories that frankly aren't even really controlled by the Pakistani government. They're controlled by like basically warlords in Pakistan. There's like border regions of Kashmir that, because the Pakistani government is not particularly sophisticated. I mean, we like to think of other countries as similar to us, but I can say this from personal experience in China. A lot of other countries are like the Wild West. You don't have the rule of law extending out, especially to remote regions of the country. The government has control in these urban centers where they have a lot of guns and a lot of military officials. But beyond that, a lot of it is it's almost like a stateless society. And that's kind of the way a lot of these border regions where a lot of these terrorists were, basically operating out of. And Tom Friedman, who himself is a neocon who supported the war in Iraq, he's written about this extensively, how India's government responded the way you should respond, which is secure your people's kind of security, do things to defend your people, but don't overreact in the same way that, I just think it's so weird how we do not extend the obligations we usually extend to ordinary people to huge governments that have bombs and nuclear weapons, right? All of us have had experiences where someone like lashes out against us in some way. And we understand that if you overreact, it's not a good thing. And we also understand that a lot of people have a tendency to overreact. But for some reason, with nation states, it's almost like we have the opposite impulse. We say like overreact, and actually we're going to encourage you to overreact even more than you otherwise would. And that's exactly what happened after 9/11. In my view, it's what happened after October 5th.
I wouldn't say that's an overreaction. Look, Al-Qaeda killed 3,000 American citizens. They attacked the Pentagon. And I mean, if we talk about just exterminating Al-Qaeda, that was mission success. Al-Qaeda doesn't exist anymore. So they at least got that out of the invasion of Afghanistan. They were able to track down Osama bin Laden into Pakistan. Again, as far as Afghanistan itself, ideally the Taliban would have been thwarted. But, mistakes were made. Trump fucked things up just beyond repair. So we had a bad presidency for that. But I wouldn't say the invasion of Afghanistan was an overreaction.
Yeah, sorry. And I will say, I think that this argument is a legitimate reason to prefer Kamala Harris over Donald Trump and feel that it's very important. And I'm fairly confident in my own views about geopolitics, but not confident enough to say that you're wrong. And that I don't think there can be reasonable differences of opinion about, because I do think Trump is a wild card. I think I think people overstate the amount of risk that's created by having someone who's a wild card in the presidency, because I think, there is kind of a deep state, whether you like it or not. And I think they will constrain him.
Yeah.
And they did.
Well, the problem is he's going to try to run his next presidential administration like he's run his businesses, where he just gets in yes men who will agree to everything he says. Like, again, that's what he's told everybody. Now, he could be lazy and just sit on his ass, kind of like he did in his, first term. But like, why take the risk?
I like how the great hope for the Trump administration is his laziness.
Yeah. His laziness and just getting blocked by more sensible voices, right? Like, that's really the only saving grace, is that Trump is lazy. Oh, he's a whack job and just a massive liar. In some ways, he's even more radical than Trump, especially when it comes to, like, the guy literally believes in shit like critical race theory and What's weird is he's married to an Indian woman, and neo-Nazis agree with his like political views, but they hate him personally because he thinks he's contributing to like that stupid theory they have of like white people going extinct.
Yeah, white replacement theory.
Yeah.
JD Vance, it's interesting because when you hear him speak, he's much more compelling and competent than Trump. And that may actually make him more dangerous.
I wouldn't say he's compelling. He's awkward and weird. When he tries to like act like a normal human being, he just seems like some kind of reminds me of Stephen Harper in some ways. I
think he was a lot better than
here.
Walz in the debate. I don't know if you listened to the debate, but he was a lot better than Walz. And even people are partisans. You don't think so?
No, I think Walz walked over him in that debate. He was saying stupid shit like what they're aborting children after they were born, and he was promoting that whole Haitians eating cats and dogs thing too.
Yeah, he was.
He's an idiot, just fundamentally an idiot, and I think he's kind of a crazy radical moron. What's funny though is he called Trump America's Hitler. As bad as
Back
he
in
is,
2016,
yeah, as bad as he is, even he recognized Trump is a fascist and compared him to Hitler.
And now he's
so
his vice
that says a
president
lot.
candidate. Yeah.
That his own vice presidential candidate called him America's
but doesn't this
Hitler.
just show how this is all theater? I mean, this is all just a performance for all of them.
Well,
none of these people, because I think the Democrats do the same thing. I mean, you have Kamala Harris, basically chanting about how she wants to stop deportations, and now she's saying she's trying to secure the border and build a better wall than Trump. You have her saying in 2019, climate crisis, climate change, we need to stop fossil fuels. Now she's all about fracking and talking about how she never.
That's so because
you have all
that's
these
just
reversals.
because of the That's just because of the current geopolitical climate. They can't buy.
Same with JD Vance.
Russian,
in 2016,
they can't buy Russian oil.
Yeah.
So you need to increase domestic production. That's just an unfortunate reality. Like, we need energy, right? Yeah. So I don't think they're not interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but the reality is we need energy.
I mean, I just fundamentally disagree
with JD Vance. It's just pure, he's just doing this entirely cynically, just to advance his political career. And I think
might be
he
true on an individual level, but politically,
by the way, if Trump dies, you got JD Vance, and Trump's not in the best of health. He almost fell over opening up a car door. He's
going to be 81 or 82 at the end of his term.
And I mean, he eats McDonald's every day. This guy could croak at any minute.
Yeah. I mean, what I was going to say is even if you're right on an individual level, that Kamala individually is not being cynical when she reverses herself on fracking, while JD Vance is when he goes from calling Trump America's Hitler to being his VP candidate. The reality is that regardless of the individual character of the candidates, the incentives of the system are very clear. That Kamala Harris has a very strong incentive because of the oil and gas industry to change her mind about fracking. And she is perfectly willing to do that. She is a product of the Democratic machine.
We need it. We need energy. I don't think that's the reason.
I fundamentally disagree with this. We need energy. And if we invested in solar the way we invested in highways a generation ago.
No.
Solar is the world's leading expert on solar. And so it is unreliable.
Cars
You're right about
run
that. So
on electricity right now, dude. We
so
need other sources of energy.
Yeah, but there are other ways of obtaining it, not through fracking. So, for example, nuclear power. That's totally legitimate.
That's not oil, okay? If we need oil to drive cars, you need to increase domestic production.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with this.
It'd be great if we had electric cars,
power, But if
I'm totally in favor of increasing nuclear power plants. And by the way, they're doing this. There are going to be new nuclear power plants opening up in the U.S. and primarily that's actually driven by AI.
Mm-hmm.
I think Microsoft is predicting 4 times higher power demands.
Yeah.
So all of this is being driven by AI. Why there's going to be new nuclear power stations. But the reason they're not supporting solar and wind is just because it's not viable. It's not as reliable as nuclear power. It doesn't provide as much energy, and there's way more waste produced
Solar
by
is actually
solar.
cheaper than nuclear per kilowatt hour. It's cheaper, and it's only getting cheaper.
I don't know about
No,
that.
that's true.
It could
It's cheaper.
be. I don't
You're
know
right,
about
it's
that
less
when you
reliable.
consider. I don't know about that if you consider you do need to replace solar panels and they do get damaged, and you do have to handle the recycling and waste from solar panels. I don't know if that's true over the lifespan of like a solar cell. And that's its own unique problem. Like maybe it's cheaper, but there's also that environmental cost of, producing all those materials and then disposing, recycling. Nuclear power, the reality is it just produces more energy more reliably. That's why there's this big push for more nuclear power plants and not solar. If solar was more economically viable, or just a more viable option, period, they would go for solar. I don't think anybody just has a fetish for nuclear fission.
Yeah, I don't think anyone has a fetish for nuclear fission. I think a lot of people, Chevron and Exxon, for example, have a fetish for fossil fuels. And they've spent a huge amount of money.
That's
and
what cars
a
drive.
huge amount of influence
Well, dude,
to try and stop solar from
the
actually becoming
problem
a
is
reality.
the problem is we're not Europe. We have a shitty public transportation system. Our rail system also sucks, and people need their cars to drive.
Yeah.
And even if you were to it's literally impossible right now to replace all cars with electric. The reality is, cars need to drive. You need to increase domestic production, because now you can't trade with Russia. There's not a great guarantee that any of these other people are importing from, like Saudi Arabia, are really going to be reliable in the long term. So you need to increase domestic production.
Yeah, I think we need to increase domestic production of energy. I don't think we have to increase fossil fuels at all.
What are cars going to run on?
And I have electricity, and I think
give me $60,000 so I can buy a Tesla. It's not that simple.
It wouldn't cost $60,000 if the government invested in electric cars the way it's invested in fossil fuels and internal combustion engine over the last 100 years. So Saul Griffith, who's a MacArthur Grant winner, and the world's leading expert on decarbonizing the economy, and he's not like some dyed-in-the-wool radical environmentalist. So, for example, he's very pro-nuclear, even though he gets shit on by environmentalists all the time for being very pro-nuclear. He's done the best analysis of this. He had a podcast on the Ezra Klein show that I'd encourage you to listen to. It's How to Decarbonize America. And I've actually talked to him as well, because when I was running for mayor in 2020, I consulted with him in enacting policy in Berkeley. And he points out that there have been two historical periods where the US government made a big bet into some new technology. And it actually was pretty easy to transition the entire economy in a very important way. The first was electrifying America. So FDR, we take it for granted every household has an electric outlet in it. But that was not true. In the early 20th century, especially in rural areas, but oftentimes even poor urban areas, people did not have outlets. Even though the technology existed, we knew how to do it. We had everything that needed to be technologically invented to have a power grid across the country. And we all take this for granted that everywhere we go, you have electricity. That was not true when FDR came into office, and he made a huge investment as part of the New Deal to say we're going to electrify America, and that's how it happened.
That was way more obvious, because people are still using friggin' steam cars at that point.
Yeah, but we could do the same for electric cars and electric heat pumps if we made the same investment in America today. And not only would that decarbonize our economy and prevent climate change, it would actually probably be very stimulative in the American economy. But the second incident, or the second historical episode, is
I don't agree with the electric car thing. They suck.
Let me just finish the thought real quick. So, and just to be clear, we don't even have a concept of how different America was before and after this. But before we electrified America, the idea that you just have all these electric devices everywhere and you can plug in just didn't exist. And America was one of the first countries to do this. It set the pattern for the entire world. So we led the entire world in saying, let's electrify the world. For better or for worse, that happened. Right. And we could do the same for cars. We could just say, let's electrify our cars. If we could electrify every household, every building in the country, we can electrify every car. But the second example which is more recent, is the interstate highway system. So we take for granted that you can just drive all over the country, right? That you can drive from one side of the country to the other side, and it's reasonable to do so. That was not the case until the 1950s, and Eisenhower decided we're going to
they did that for military reasons.
Partly for national security reasons, partly because they thought if there's nuclear war, we need to transport people around. Partly because they thought if an airplane needs to land somewhere in Nebraska, we need, basically an effective runway. But the point is, we lived in an economy in a world in the 1950s where you just could not drive from one part of America to the next because there were no interstate highways. Or you might be able to do it, but it'd be really, really slow because there'd be a lot of places where the roads are really bad and maybe there's only local roads and you're going to be driving like 10 miles an hour. And Eisenhower said, we're going to make a big bet on highways. And we did. They invested a huge amount of money into it. It built this infrastructure that now we all take for granted. And we can't even imagine what it was like before this, because everywhere we go nowadays in Canada or the United States, you can just drive everywhere. And again, the rest of the world sort of followed. They realized, oh, you can do this, you know? And we could do the same for electric cars. Electrifying America and building the interstate highway system was a harder project than transitioning our transport system to electric cars and our heating. So basically, we really need to do primarily two things. Heating and cooling needs to be electric, and cars need to be electric. And we're done. You know, that's not entirely solving the problem.
Heating for smaller buildings, electric makes a lot more sense. But as far as like electrifying the roadways, that is hard to do right now, and people aren't really sure exactly where the technology is headed, because this is coming from a guy who, I got 2 electric motorcycles and I've dealt with all the problems they have. Absolute dog shit in the winter.
No. I've heard that.
Even
the batteries
with vehicles,
fail, basically, right? They don't work properly.
Even with vehicles that have like battery heating systems, you get no range. Like, you are fucking screwed. And then on top of that, the charging infrastructure is fucking terrible. Yeah. And yeah, if the US government invests like billions and billions of dollars upgrading the charging infrastructure, well, what's going to happen in 10 years when we use completely different battery chemistry that's way better, and it's like this whiz-bang technology? We might not even be using batteries in the future. There's interest in using capacitors. Capacitor technology isn't great right now, but they could be as good for energy storage as batteries in the future, and they can charge in literally seconds. So after spending, billions and billions and billions of dollars into like battery technology that we might not be using in the future, and all these charging stations that we might not be using in the future, like, it's kind of a risky, weird bet right now. And especially for a technology that not many people like, that isn't great. Electric is great in certain scenarios. Like, if you live in California and you don't have to drive particularly far, or you're just driving within California.
In other words,
it never gets cold. Yeah. Like, it never gets cold.
It's a little different.
California has a great charging infrastructure, especially when you compare it to other US states. You can find plenty of DC fast charging. Yeah. If you live in that state and you only really plan to travel in that state, it makes a ton of sense. And there's like some other niche uses, like if you're just some old lady who just travels to get groceries and you don't want to put a lot of time in, upkeeping your car. Like, you can't really remember to, every 5,000 or 10,000 kilometers, bring it to a service center and get like a belt replaced or something. It's good for those sorts of people. And like, if you do certain like recreational activities like dirt biking, I actually really like electric dirt bikes. They're not like race engines, so they don't race like the dirt bikes that you normally get. They require like a fair bit of maintenance because they're usually race built engines. They don't pollute, especially like compared to 2-strokes. And they're quiet, and they have a lot of power, a lot of torque. They're really fun. Like, electric's good for certain scenarios like that. But if you live in like North America, especially North America, where it gets cold half the year, they suck. They suck. And if you're, if you're a person, if you're a person who needs a truck too, like you tow, garbage, pure shit. They
doesn't it just reduce the range? It just reduces the range considerably. It still works.
You get no range. If you're towing anything in an electric vehicle, you get shit range, and you're especially screwed because there's not enough charging stations. And it gets cold too. So you're like triple screwed if you need a truck and it's electric. Like, it's just, diesel engines are just better at towing.
Yeah.
And you can't really get around that. Like if you own a business where you need a tow truck, I don't see how you could use an electric tow truck with today's technology. You just can't.
Yeah.
It's impossible. So I think more people could use electric vehicles. A lot of people massively overestimate how much range they really need.
Yeah.
And they're paranoid. Oh, what if I travel out of state? Like suddenly when they never do it. Sure, you can replace a lot of cars on the road today with electric, but acting like you could just, with government investment, make all vehicles electric, that's just bullshit. Not with today's technology, and it's a huge gamble.
You want to know
no one knows
all these problems?
What?
Sending $174 billion that we spent in the Ukraine war on electric cars for America.
We didn't spend $174 billion on the Ukraine war.
I'm pretty sure that's the number. I just Googled it. Is that wrong?
No. That's not in cash. So that's not in cash. That's in. So most of that money is in the form of munitions that we would have had to spend more money anyway.
Yeah. To maintain
disassembling.
Yeah.
So it made more sense to just send them to Ukraine, and then the dollar value of those munitions are calculated. But
whatever the amount is, I mean, let's say it's 175 just for the sake of argument. I actually just did the calculation. If you spent that $175 billion, now granted, I could see how it's not fungible completely because you're talking about munitions. You can't just take the money that's already invested in ammunition and suddenly turn it into money they can use to buy a car. You could buy 3,060,000 Teslas for Americans. You know how many cars are sold every year in the United States?
Teslas suck, dude. How many? They're garbage. They're pieces of shit.
You know how many cars are sold every year in America? 3 million. So you could buy every single car that was going to be bought by an American and just give it to every American for free. And not just some cheap piece of crap car, but a $60,000 Tesla. Granted, the numbers aren't entirely accurate because I take your point that $175 billion for munitions is not going to be fungible. It can't directly be just applied to buying cars for America.
I think in like cold hard cash, we've sent like something between 20, 30 billion.
But 30 billion is a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Mean, I could do a lot with that money.
I agree. I would. So here, maybe we could agree on this. I would much prefer the U.S. government give that $20 billion to you than Ukraine.
I don't think you would.
Really?
Well,
you doubt
if they don't give that money to Ukraine,
I would much rather you have the money than Ukraine.
Well, if they don't give that money to
Ukraine,
if they don't give that money to Ukraine and Ukraine loses, well, now you might have bigger, large-scale wars that you're going to have to get involved in now, which would cost more money. And on top of that,
Ukraine's going to lose anyways.
Well, dude, no, they're not. No, they're not. If they get proper funding, particularly from the U.S., they're not going to lose. Russia is absolutely collapsing. There's no chance in hell they can continue this war for more than 2 years. They're absolutely screwed.
Yeah, you might be right. All right, last two questions for me, I think, and then, I mean, if there's anything else you want to talk about, I'm down. But one is, who are you predicting is going to win this election?
Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Is this because of
There's a few... Well, yeah, there's a few reasons. One, Alan Lichtman has the 13 Keys system, which is the best system of predictability for predicting U.S. election outcomes. So that's the safest prediction. On top of that, Trump is not a very popular candidate. He's more of a niche candidate. So his only chance of winning is with electoral votes. He's going to lose the popular vote. The only reason he won against Hillary is because Hillary is the most unlikable candidate in just history. She's a terrible person, a liar, scumbag. Her husband is a serial rapist. She's joked about, like when she was an attorney, getting a guy off who she knew raped a child and laughed about it while being audio recorded. Like, she's just an evil, horrible person that nobody liked. If the Democratic Party had run somebody like Bernie Sanders, no chance in hell Trump would have won.
Yeah.
That's the only reason Trump won. And then
Bernie's
sure enough, when
he's a really compelling speaker and
Trump?
I like him a lot. No, Bernie.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Bernie's
Bernie
great.
fan.
I've lost a lot of respect for him though, because of the his stupid take on Israel Palestine.
Well, I mean, you should lose the
Yeah.
spectrum of his take on animals too, because he sent hundreds of millions of
Yeah.
dollars in subsidies to factory farms. So that's, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see Bernie as a morally serious person, but among all the political candidates, he's the one I like the most in the last 15 years.
Yeah. And sure enough, like again, Biden defeated Trump, and Biden defeated Trump before all this crazy crap happened. So before the civil suit with Eugene Carroll, where he was found criminally liable for sexual assault, that's before the New York civil fraud case.
He was found civilly liable for defamation, but that was contingent on the jury also concluding that he had committed a crime. So to be clear, he was not convicted of sexual assault, but the jury had to conclude that he had, basically the jury had to conclude that he was criminally liable for sexual assault in order to find him liable civilly for defamation.
And then there's the other criminal indictments, January 6th. There's like the Stormy Daniels thing, the weird relationship he has with that chick where he's probably having sex with her even though he's still married. Like it's just like his recent relationship with Epstein, huh?
This is recent?
Yeah, I can't remember her name for some reason right now. She's
Laura
Jewish.
Loomer?
She's a huge Laura Loomer.
Yeah,
he's probably banging her. Yeah,
are you getting sued
his
for
wife,
defamation, Richard, for this? Are you sure about this?
His wife refuses to talk to him. You will never see his wife near him anymore.
No, that's true. It's a little creepy.
His like everybody who's worked for him is either in jail, pleaded guilty, is talking to the FBI and shit against him, or they're just saying horrible things about him, like the Nazi comments that his like former chief of staff and general was saying. So if Biden could win against a Trump that didn't have that tarnished reputation yet, I don't see how Kamala Harris could lose, considering like all the crazy unhinged crap that he's done leading up to now.
So what does it say?
And by the way,
he does win.
Well, I guess people are going to get exactly what they asked for and more. You know,
I think he's going to win. I think it's close, but I think he's going to win.
I don't think it's particularly close. There's already some data that's been posted that he's like losing Pennsylvania. Yeah. And he's already freaking out about it. He made a post on Truth Social talking about how the election's being stolen, and he's already freaking out, and we're like, that's days out from the election.
Yeah. I mean, so prediction markets and the prediction models that I follow, like The Economist and Nate Silver, they're definitely showing the race is moving back in the direction of Harris. And I actually just checked election betting odds, which is like an aggregator of various prediction markets. And it's down to 53% for Trump, 46% for Harris, which is the highest it's been for Harris in the last month. But yeah, I mean, one statistic that I think is just going to be hard to overcome is just how such a dramatic percentage of the population thinks the country's going in the wrong direction. I think people rightly recognize that America and the world are going in a very bad direction. I don't think Trump's the answer, but we haven't given them a better answer than that. And I think,
America was going in a good direction under Biden. Like, these people are just insane morons who are voting for Trump. Like, if you ask them why they're voting for Trump, everything they say
my dad's voting for Trump. Don't call my dad an insane moron.
Every reason that people are giving to vote for Trump is just stupid. Like, they'll say, the economy was better. Well, it wasn't better. There's a better economy under Biden. And Trump's tax policies drove up the national debt like to an insane degree. And now he's making even more crazy tax policies. He's like considering getting rid of income tax and saying he'll make up the difference with tariffs.
Which is it's
just insane. It's insane, crazy nonsense. There were no wars.
Trump just because he's pro-life, and that's it. He's kind of a single issue voter. So I don't know. I don't know what your take on that is. If you talked about
it's just remarkably stupid.
I mean, I think that if you're talking about embryos, for sure, first trimester, but probably the first two trimesters. I do think there's an argument in the third trimester, to be honest. I mean, this is controversial on the left, that I think at some point
I
fetus
think the earliest you could. Yeah, I think the earliest you could assume a fetus is sentient is at about 14 weeks.
Yeah.
But regardless, who cares? It's a stupid little creature living inside of you. And That's another asshole that's going to be shat out of a woman who's going to eat meat and be a dick and fuck with you. Who cares? If it's their
I take
business.
back
If
that
they
this
don't
is
want
the
the
most
kid,
optimistic conversation I've had with you.
yeah. If they don't want a kid, let them have an abortion. I don't care. I don't need more assholes running around eating meat and crap.
Yeah.
So that's my take on abortion. Just keep
Fair
it
enough.
legal. Don't mess with women.
I do think if someone believes that that fetuses are sentient, especially in an earlier state, and I mean, I think the evidence that they're sentient or have any sort of moral status at conception is just preposterous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
an
insane.
embryo is no different than a fingernail cell, or I mean, any other cells in
Yeah.
the body. But I do respect my dad's position, to be honest, and I think it's good faith for him and for a lot of Americans. I was just in Utah, and I think there are a lot of people in Utah, for example, who are pro-life, and just they have a different moral conviction. And I think we shouldn't denigrate them for that, even if they stomach some of the other character flaws.
No, they're not pro-life. They're all these people who claim to be pro-life. The majority of them are just insane religious whack jobs. They want to
there's a lot of
ban
that
like
too.
contraceptives. So no.
Yeah, or like, and it is weird, kind of the inconsistency on IVF, because if you really think embryos are sentient
Yeah.
and are deserve moral consideration, why would you accept IVF? Because IVF is
Yeah.
disposing of murdering so many embryos. So last question, or maybe comment is, what do you? I guess this is a question. We've talked a lot about what we disagree about. What do you think we agree on? And I'm going to propose something. Would you agree that doing vegan activism is much more important than voting?
I think they kind of pull at different strings. I
If
think
you
they're
had to
both
choose, which
important.
one's more important? If you had to do one,
If I had to choose, and if I could only do one, I don't know. For me personally, maybe vegan activism.
you don't think there's an argument just because of the? I mean, first of all, I guess even setting aside the disagreements you've had about the impact of the vote, not the impact of the vote, but the differences between the political parties, the likelihood that you're going to have an impact as a voter, as opposed to the likelihood you're going to have an impact in a sea of other voters who are voting in all sorts of arbitrary ways,
Well,
versus a
especially in
world
an
where,
electoral college.
yeah, where your vote doesn't even directly count. I mean, if you're in California, it doesn't matter at all, at least at the presidential level. Well, as a vegan activist, there's so few of us, and like, I mean, I was hoping we would agree on this, but maybe we won't. I just think there's such a strong case that just because of diminishing marginal returns, there's so few vegan activists out there. And if you're a vegan activist, you can make such a huge difference compared to the impact you can have voting. And for a class of beings that are being much more severely harmed than any classes of beings that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump are trying to represent.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree?
I think I would agree, but with that said, though, doesn't mean voting isn't more important. I think it's clear what the better candidate is.
Yeah, I think voting is important. I just think this system, the choices we have right now, are not very important. And if we had, and we could have an entire.
I would disagree with that. Like, again, a party that's going to lead to further large-scale wars with, fascist countries like China, Russia, versus a party that's going to stop them and prevent them from doing that in the first place. That's a massive, massive difference you can make by voting for the right candidate.
I think that's fair. And like I said, if you thought there was a big difference between the two parties in that regard, then I think that would be a very good reason to feel strongly your vote was really important. I just happen to not feel that way factually. Anyways, this has been great. We've gone over 2 hours. I'd love to talk to you again after the election. We can break it down, but appreciate the time. Any final thoughts for our audience, Richard?
Yeah, vote Kamala, especially if you live in a swing state. I'd rather not have the U.S. system and just geopolitics in general be completely screwed up over, an idiot who doesn't even know what NATO is.
And this is going to come out tomorrow.
Killed, by the way, if there is conscription in the U.S., there's technically conscription in every country if they really need it.
Yep.
So again, if you're supporting a political candidate that is going to encourage more large-scale global conflicts by not stopping these dictators in their tracks, vegans, like your kids who are vegan, if they're 18, they're likely going to end up being shipped off to war and die, and then that's a lower vegan population for you.
This is one of the few instances where you actually have a pretty mainstream take, Richard.
Maybe.
Anyways, whatever you think about that position, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So put something in the comments to the podcast, the YouTube show. But again, appreciate the time you took with us, Richard. And let's talk again maybe at the election and break down what we think is going to happen next. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Thanks. Appreciate it. We don't have to hurt animals. You can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.